President Obama back in 2015, but is willing to accept some kind of agreement with Tehran if it prevents the Iranians from acquiring nuclear weapons. We're here to discuss international affairs analyst and author Dr. Emmanuel Navod. Thanks for joining us. And over in Bahrain tonight, Abdullah Ali Naid, a Bahraini columnist and geopolitical analyst. Thank you very much for being with us as well. And I'll start with you, if I may, Mr. Ali Naid, over in Bahrain. What do you expect to come out of this meeting tonight? Might we see some real progress on moving towards a new deal with Iran?
To tell you the truth, Laura, I don't think anything will materialize, nor from Washington, nor from the Vienna talks. At the present time, it's very much clear that the United States can't deliver on any promise, and it's fast losing a lot of support of its main strategic allies in the region and internationally.
Dr. Navon, if I could turn to you, there are reports that officials in the Biden administration will tonight tell the Israelis that they do prefer the diplomatic route, but that other options are on the table. What do they mean by those other options, do you think?
Well, if you remember under the Obama administration, when President Obama used to say that all options were on the table, this included the military option. The question is today, of course, how realistic such an option is, since we know that Iran's nuclear sites are deep inside, underground and spread out around a very large country. So, of course, the United States has a huge military capability, and especially if it would be backed up also by Israel. But I think the message that the Biden administration is trying to convey to the Iranian regime is that we're not desperate. We're not willing to sign any deal and accept your terms. You should know that we have a backup option, which is the military option, which is what the Biden administration means, basically, when it says all options are on the table.
Which is interesting when you see the US withdrawal across the region. That would be a very difficult sell, I would imagine, to the American people. If we could go back to Bahrain for a moment, though, because I want to bring in some context, if we could, to talk about what's at stake here, because we have had some very alarming reports of late about how close Iran is to acquiring weapons-grade uranium. The breakout time now dwindling down to a few months. What are the concerns in your part of the world?
You know, the acquisition of Iran, or developing the capability to produce a nuclear device or devices through the accelerated enrichment program. It may sound alarming, and it is alarming for the whole world and not just the region, but how realistic it is for the Iranian, especially with the setbacks that they are facing, all over this program. First of all, have they developed the, let's say, the package, as I call it, the external parts of that device, or do they have the engineering for that? Two, do they have the nuclear trigger? And we know when they lost a few months ago the head of that program, that program in itself, without the nuclear trigger, they won't be able to seriously develop or reach a time where they could seriously have a nuclear device. Three, they have the delivery capabilities. At the present time, their ballistic missiles, I don't know, if there is reports about having capable warhead to fit on their current ballistic missile program or missiles, because at the present time there is no evidence of that, and that program in itself have suffered a lot of setbacks. I think the biggest worries, and thank God that probably the Russia and China may support this, point of not having Iran getting the capability to secure such a nuclear capability through a third party, and mostly North Korea.
And I guess, Emmanuel Navon, the big question is as well is whether Iran will actually return to the table for talks. We've got Iran's new hardline president, Ibrahim Raisi, saying recently that the US sanctions were a crime against humanity. That's what he called them. They don't sound like they're ready to talk to the Americans quite yet.
Well, the question is at this point is really what interest the Iranians have to re-enter any deal, because they've reached the threshold of the nuclear weapons. Since the U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA, the Iranians have moved very fast to the threshold capability, and that's where they are today. They are very close to the threshold, A, and B, as you guessed in Bahrain said correctly, the Iranians have been able to bypass most of the U.S. sanctions thanks to China and Russia. And therefore, today, the United States, as opposed to the pre-JCPOA international context, cannot count on the cooperation of China and Russia to reimpose sanctions on Iran. The Chinese are not playing balls, the Russians are not either. And therefore, America's capability to impose tough sanctions on Iran today are very limited. So there are U.S. sanctions, but these are mostly bypassed by China and by Russia. Therefore, Iran is able to survive economically despite U.S. sanctions. And as I said, since they basically reached the threshold capability to the bomb, they have very little interest to reach another deal with the United States.
Abdullah Ali Junaid, very little incentive for Iran to rejoin these talks. Do you agree with that?
I'll tell you the truth. A few days ago, probably, I have one of those webinars where we had a discussion, and there was the assumption: why not accept a nuclear, program, military nuclear program? That may help Iran feel a little bit more secure. And I said, well, for Iran's security, it's not the Iran security we're talking about. It is the regime security at our cost. And we have seen exactly what sort of rewards that the Iranians have harvested since 2015. So are we willing to continue and enticing or encouraging Iran with more incentives? I believe we need to seriously and collectively, regionally, make our point of view with regard to what Iran represents, not just for the region, but internationally. Look at the maritime routes and other things.
Abdullah Ali Junaid in Bahrain and Dr. Emmanuel Navon, thank you both.